Roaring Moon has been having a ton of success in the Japanese City League format. With the upcoming Surging Sparks set list, it does gain a few new cards. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Surging Sparks deck list for Roaring Moon. We do play the 4 baby Roaring Moons with the Vengeance Fletching attack that does 70 damage plus 10 more for each ancient card in your discard pile. This is your main attacker. That is why we play 4 of them. It also powers up your other Roaring Moon attacks as they are knocked out. Just a very, very powerful, single prize Pokemon. Might be the best single prize deck in the entire format. Has been for quite a while. The biggest card that we gain from Surging Sparks is the Ancient Koraidon with its attack Unrelenting Onslaught that reads, if one of your other ancient Pokemon use an attack during your last turn, this attack does 150 more damage, which is absolutely crazy. You can actually pair this with Great Tusk using its Land Collapse Mill attack to discard 4 cards if you played an ancient card, and then you could swap to a Koraidon once this has been knocked out and do 180 damage for 2 energy. You can use a Professor Sada's Vitality and a manual attachment to power up this attack. It's also a backup attacker for your Roaring Moon. Just power it up on the bench with your Professor Sada. All of our Pokemon only have a 2 energy cost, so a Professor Sada and a manual attachment for turn will allow us to attack with everything in our deck except for Fluttermane. We do still play the 3 Fluttermanes. Sometimes you just want this in your active spot at the beginning. The Midnight Fluttering ability turns off all of your opponent's abilities in the active slot. This could turn off, Comphase. This could turn off a lot of decks. If your opponent's playing Lugia V-Star and it's in the active spot, they would have to swap it to the bench before they're able to use Summoning Star. Just a really powerful card to sit in the active spot. And if you can use the Hex Curl attack, it does 90 damage, and you put 2 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's just an overall just really, really good card to have in your deck. Very versatile. Also an ancient Pokemon, which powers up your Vengeance Fletching attack even more. Most of the time, you're not using the Fluttermane. Your main attackers are the Great Tusk in the early game to mill your opponent, and then you want to go into your Roaring Moon and Koraidon as soon as you possibly can. Our support Pokemon for the deck are Pekka EX with its ability Subjugating Chains. We just don't want to get trapped in the active. Great Tusk has a lot of retreat costs. Koraidon has 2 retreat costs. Roaring Moon has 2 retreat costs. We just don't want to get trapped in the active. This deck struggles pretty heavily against like Great Tusk Mill, for instance. It also struggles against Snorlax, obviously. If you're unable to swap your Pokemon around, your opponent could get a hold of this Radiant Greninja and put it on your bench, bring it up to the active, and then you just kind of lose the game. You don't play really any other way to swap out your Pokemon, and this keeps us from having to play Switch Cart, Switch, Professor Turo, all of these other item and supporter cards that just kind of clog up your deck whenever we could just run the Pekka. Most matchups, you're not even going to bench this Pokemon. It's just going to be, just in case, Break Glass, just in case. And it can also be a really good late game attacker if your opponent doesn't respect it. You could power it up with 2 manual attachments and then hit your opponent for up to 300 damage. We play 4 Professor Sada. Obviously, this is our main energy acceleration, our main draw supporter. Allows us to put up to 2 energy into play. We use Radiant Greninja to get energy in our discard. We use Earthen Vessel to get energy in our discard. Just so many cards to get energy in our discard. Professor Sada is a must-have. Explorer's Guidance is more just for the Vengeance Fletching attack to be powered up. Most of the time when you see these, you just kind of want to dump them into your discard pile as soon as possible. It's not really your preferred card to play, but sometimes it's all you have. We do have the 1 Boss's Orders. Sometimes you just want to get around your opponent's active. Having the Boss's Orders is a good card to do that. We only play the 1 because we do play a Pal Pad. If you need more than 1 Boss's Orders, you can put back the one you've already played or discarded with your Pal Pad. For Nest Ball, want to be able to search out our Pokemon very, very aggressively. You always want to have 2 attackers on your bench. You don't necessarily want to overbench your ancient Pokemon because you do want them in the discard pile to be able to power up your attack. But you do want at least, 1 Roaring Moon, 1 Koraidon on your board at all times. And once they're knocked out, you replace them immediately with another attacking option. We got the 4 Earthen Vessel, powers up your attack. One of the best energy search cards of all time, honestly. We play the 4 Pokegear. Playing a Professor Sada every single turn is very, very important in this deck. Pokegear 3.0 allows us to search for our Professor Sadas more aggressively. Just kind of speaks for itself. 3 Night Stretcher. This allows us to pull energy out of our discard pile to use Radiant Greninja, allows us to pull our attackers from the discard pile, put directly back on our bench. Just a very, very versatile card. I really like Super Rod in this deck because if you mill your own like Roaring Moons with your Pokestop, or if your opponent is taking knockouts every single turn, sometimes it can be kind of difficult to kind of keep ahead of that with just Night Stretcher, but we do play the one Super Rod. Let's go ahead and just grab that. Since we're already talking about it, let's just go ahead and grab it. We do play the one Super Rod for that reason. We just want to be able to shuffle back in some Roaring Moons occasionally. Sometimes we just need more energy. Shuffle back in some energies, use Earthen Vessel, grab 2 energies out, use 1 for Radiant Greninja, and 1 to manually attach with our Pokemon. All of our attacks only cost 2 energy, except for our Flutter Mane. So it's a very, very viable strategy to just kind of keep cycling through and to keep the pressure on your opponent. We play 2 Ultra Ball. This allows us to discard energy from our hand, allows us to kind of thin out our hand in the later game. It's also able to be searched out with Secret Box if you need to discard energies to be able to use Professor Sada. Being able to discard 2 energies is very, very nice. We do play Counter Catcher. In the early game, you're not doing a ton of damage. If you attack with your Roaring Moon, you're probably only doing 100 to 150 damage on the first time you're attacking. You could go into your Koraidon the next turn and do 180 damage. That's why that Koraidon is so, so powerful, and it's actually a very, very big boost to the overall power level of this deck. You could start two-shotting your opponent's Pokemon as early as your 3rd turn, which is just crazy. But we do have the Counter Catcher to be able to gust around. It's able to be searched out with our Secret Box, which is our ace spec of choice. There's just no better option for this deck. It allows you to search for whatever you need for your deck. It's so powerful. You get your Pokestop, you get your Professor Sada, you get your Counter Catcher, you get your Night Stretcher, you get your Super Rod, you get your Earthen Vessel, you get whatever you need. You get your Ancient Booster Capsules. It's just so strong in this deck. And when you're needing to discard energy card, you could discard them with Secret Box. We play the 1 Pal Pad to be able to put back our boss's orders and our Professor Sada specifically. We have the 4 Ancient Booster Capsules. This is mainly just to power up our Vengeance Fletching. We can search it out with Secret Box, but sometimes having 200 HP on your Roaring Moons or 190 HP on your Koraidon and 200 on your Great Tusk, I do believe, it's just really, really strong. And sometimes it's hard for your opponent to deal with. If they're not taking a 1-hit KO on your single prize Pokemon, you get an extra turn to attack. It really does swing the prize trade in your favor. We do play the 3 Pokestops. Pokestop is just a really, really good option for this deck because of how many item cards it plays. You also want to have Pokemon, and it's one of the few decks you're actually happy to see it mill your supporters and your Pokemon. You want all the ancient cards you can get into your discard pile as soon as possible. Pokestop allows you to do that by discarding those cards. You pull the items to your hand, and then you can discard even more cards with the items that you get from Pokestop. We do play the 1 Gravity Mountain. This helps us set up the 2-hit KOs in the early game with Roaring Moon and Koraidon. The minus 30 HP is a huge, huge deal for setting up early 2-hit KOs. If you go second, you can get your first attack off. You could swap into the Koraidon for your second turn, and you're able to take big knockouts on stage 2 Pokemon, even if they get that early rare candy. This deck actually struggled mightily with big stage 2, big HP Pokemon for the majority of the format. It basically auto wins against 2-prize basic Pokemon decks, but it really struggled with stage 2 decks because of that high HP. This allows us to kind of work around that with the Koraidon to take those big knockouts that we were kind of struggling with until the mid to late game, when it was too late, whenever we were out of resources and our opponent just won the game. Our energy count, we do play 7 Dark Energies. I feel like this is a good number. Allows us to search out with Earthen Vessel, allows us to use Radiant Greninja, allows us to use Night Stretcher. We never really run out of energy. In the very, very end game, late game, it does get kind of sketchy on the manual attachment. But as long as you're using your Professor Sada to put 2 energy into play every single turn, you're going to be okay. So make sure you always have at least... Make sure you always have, 2 attackers on your board. Don't underestimate the power of Great Tusk. Milling your opponent for 4 cards is so strong in some matchups, and a lot of the time it can win you the end game if they just have a few cards left in their deck, or if you know what deck list they're playing. If they need a specific card, you hit them with the Great Tusk, and like a Counter Catcher, you could trap them in the active, and it's just a very, very underrated play in the Roaring Moon deck. Koraidon makes this deck so much stronger in the early game, which is what this deck was lacking originally with its initial build when it first released. And now, I don't know. I think it's the best single prize deck. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments.